Now, I've already recorded some videos about my experiences of living in South Italy as a Brit, the challenges, the cultural differences, the things that I find difficult. But in today's video, I want to take it from a different angle, and I actually want to compare how I lived my life back in London to how I now live my life in Palermo, and indeed in South Italy in general, because I did spend 4 years living in Salerno as well. So if this sounds of interest, then make sure you stay tuned. And if you enjoy learning more about the reality of everyday life in South Italy, whether you plan to visit or to move here, then why not subscribe so that you don't miss any of my future content. Let's get into the video. So the first aspect that I want to talk about is punctuality. There is a clear, significant difference between the way punctuality is viewed back in the UK compared to how it is viewed here in South Italy. In the UK, there is definitely more of a mindset where if you are 1, 2, 3, even 4 minutes late past your appointed time, you are considered late. Whereas here in South Italy, there's a more relaxed approach taken to timekeeping. And you could be 5 minutes, 10 minutes, up to 15 minutes past your appointed time, and it's still considered to be okay. You're still considered to be on time, shall we say. Now, this is in complete contrast to how I live my life. I definitely retain the British punctuality and the sense of discipline that brings in my life here in South Italy, which is why I think sometimes I run into difficulties because life here is completely the opposite to that. But personally, I think being late for something is one of the rudest things that you can do. Like, okay, there are moments in life where you can't help it. External situations you cannot control, the alarm clock doesn't go off, or you end up stuck in a traffic jam. Okay, those are things you can't control. But when you are repeatedly late for something just because you have this relaxed doppeldomani attitude, then I think it shows a complete lack of respect for a person's time, and it isn't a polite thing to do. And this is why I really struggle sometimes with punctuality here, because I think it's not difficult to set an alarm and try to make it on time somewhere. And I think sometimes people just don't have that mindset here, and it can be very challenging living everyday life where people don't really have this concept of timekeeping. So the next aspect is organisation. This part makes me laugh so much because honestly, the way my life was organised back in the UK, completely different to how my life is organised now here in South Italy. Let's talk about the UK. I feel in the UK, we are, as a country, a lot more organised. There are systems in place to make dealing with things like bureaucracy so much easier. We utilise technology more to the point where you don't often have to go to offices in person to deal with bureaucracy. You can do it all online. And trust me when I say that makes an absolute world of difference to your experience, to the efficiency, and just to the overall time it takes to get things done. Here in Italy, it's totally different. South Italy, mustn't forget the South. Here in South Italy, it's very different. So, the left hand often doesn't know what the right hand is doing. There is a complete mishmash of communication channels, which essentially means that people don't speak to each other, and the bureaucracy is so intense here that you tie yourself in knots trying to deal with it, to the point where nothing gets done. You have to wait a very, very long time, and people just ultimately don't have a clue. And it can be very, very frustrating to live your life like this. There is also more of a traditional sense of dealing with things here as well. Like, you do have to visit offices more in presence. Not everything is dealt with online, which does delay processes and make things super inconvenient when you have limited free time available. There's also this kind of mindset of doppeldomani, and this is something that I liken to you just don't want to do something, because doppeldomani is like after tomorrow, but it's usually said in a way that doppeldomani, doppeldomani. In other words, you just don't want to do it ever. And this is something which can be really frustrating, especially when you have a deadline or there are things that you need to get done. I also find that compared to my life back in the UK, where people will tend to plan things further in advance and get organised in that way, here people tend to live more in the moment. And whilst you will find people who will plan and organise themselves, it's not for everyone. And a lot of people like to live in the present moment and plan just a very, very, very short time in advance. And any kind of long-term plans are not really considered. So this can be very difficult sometimes to deal with, the feeling that there isn't really a proper form of organisation here in South Italy in any respect. And it does make sometimes for a very difficult quality of life. So it's definitely something that you have to think about if being organised and efficient is something that is important to you, because here in South Italy, it doesn't always exist. Road safety. Can we talk about road safety, please? Because this is a topic I could chat about for hours. My experiences here in South Italy, I could fill a book with. Honestly, it's insane. So let's talk about the UK. We have what is known as the Highway Code in the UK, which essentially is the rules of the road. And it is a book that contains everything that you should and shouldn't do when you are driving on the roads of the United Kingdom. However, in Italy, this doesn't exist and people drive as they please. Everyone is out for themselves. Hell have no fury like an Italian who is late for work or is heading home for lunch or heading home at the end of a long day. Trust me, if you have to cross the road at a designated crossing in front of an Italian in one of those situations, you better say your 10 Hail Marys before you put one foot onto the crossing, because trust me, ain't nobody gonna stop for you. And if they do, they're gonna look at you like you're a piece of dirt, or they're gonna drive towards you, or at best, you're going to be on the crossing and they're going to be looking at you as they drive past you. It's wild. I'm telling you, this is the Wild West. And it's so funny sometimes because I think of how it is back in the UK. Cars stop for you at crossings. It's unheard of for cars to go through red lights on a regular basis. Of course, some people do it. We're not all angels in the UK, but it's not a regular occurrence. And, you know, cars will stop for you. And there is an overall sense of safety when you drive in the UK compared to how it is here. Here in South Italy, here in Palermo, in fact, because Palermo, I have never seen driving standards so poor as they are here in Palermo. I would be surprised if 90% of the population here have a driving license, because honestly, the driving standards are ridiculous. They are one of the worst aspects of living in this part of Italy. And it covers so many different spectrums, like from the way people park here. The parking is so ignorant, like people block crossings, pedestrian crossings, to the point where unless you're like really, really skinny, you can't squeeze through the cars to cross the road at that point, which means people with buggies and children and disabled people and even just normal pedestrians, they are having to go out into the main road itself to be able to cross at a crossing. It's so dangerous and it's incredible. And I see this happen on a regular basis. This is not a one-off occurrence. The police don't do anything. Like sometimes they'll pop up and they'll go through a stage of really clamping down on the inconsiderate parking, but it never lasts for very long. And so people just continue to revert back to their old habits. And then let's not talk about indicators. I actually believe indicators are an optional extra when you choose to purchase a car here in Italy, based on the sheer number of times that I've seen them in use here. It's amazing. Like literally, it's like Russian roulette when you're driving along as to which way a car is going to go in front of you. You just have no idea because they never communicate that to you. It's insane. In the UK, we use our indicators, generally speaking, and parking is generally better. I'm not saying it's always perfect, especially outside schools. You'll often see in the news people complaining that people park in front of driveways just so they can drop their children off to school. It happens. We do have inconsiderate people who park in the UK. However, what is different is that there's generally more of a sense of fear that a ticket inspector is going to pounce, because one thing that we do good in the UK is issue parking tickets and fines for people who park in the wrong place, something that doesn't happen as frequently as it should here in Palermo, because I'm pretty certain if a ticket inspector went round and ticketed all the cars in the wrong place, people would soon learn to park somewhere else. And let's not talk about the condition of the cars. Cars here in South Italy look like shit heaps. Like literally, I've never seen so many scratched, damaged, mashed up cars as I have here in South Italy. Like in the UK, we take pride in our cars. Like, you know, if you get a little scratch, people are like distraught. People really look after their cars. And yes, you can find some people who don't really pay as much attention to the quality of their car. But overall, people are really protective of their cars. Like something that happens here in Italy, which would never happen in the UK, is that people sit on cars and scooters and mopeds. If they're kind of outside a bar, for example, people are having a drink and they just kind of rest against the car or sit on the moped whilst they're having a drink. Trust me, if that happened in the UK, people would be out and saying, get off my car, what are you doing? Like it's a totally different mindset, totally different. And then when we're talking about the road conditions themselves, potholes. Now, potholes exist in the UK, like without a doubt, and they occur really frequently as well. But the difference is when those insurance claims keep piling up, they do the work and they fix those potholes. It gets done. However, here in South Italy, here in Palermo, the potholes last for weeks and months. And even when they are fixed, sometimes it's not to a high enough quality. So a few months later, it reappears again. So it's like this never ending circle of poor road conditions, poor driving, which makes it, I think, really, really dangerous to be a pedestrian here in South Italy. Let's talk about meal times. Now here, I think there is definitely a better emphasis on meal times in South Italy than there is in the UK. In the UK, we have so-called TV dinners where people will eat their food on their lap while watching their favourite TV show. There isn't as much of an emphasis for everybody to be sitting at the table together when they eat. Sometimes people take their food into their rooms or into a different part of the house to eat their food. And also, we don't have this culture where we wait for people to have their plates filled before we start eating. Once the food is in front of you, people generally just start to tuck in, and there isn't the whole like culture of greeting each other before you begin to eat either. So I kind of feel that when it comes to meal times in the UK, we don't place as high an importance on them as they do here in South Italy. Here in South Italy, it's like, it's a culture. I think this is the only thing I can say. It's like a culture. Food is a culture here. It's an integral part of the way that they live their lives. In fact, you really notice this in the afternoons when most of the local shops and businesses will close for a couple of hours so they can go home and have lunch and have a rest. There is a real essence of just how important meal times are here in South Italy. You find that everybody sits together, everybody waits for all the plates to be filled before they eat. And everybody says that classic buon appetito just before they begin to eat. It's a really beautiful thing. And I actually think I appreciate meal times even more so since I moved here to South Italy than I ever did in the past. Put it this way, in nearly 6 years of living in this country, I've never had a TV dinner. So yeah, my life has totally changed in this respect for the better. Okay, when it comes to sense of style and fashion sense in general, in the UK, it's a very multicultural, diverse country, and as such, that is reflected in the way people dress and their sense of style. And this is really nice because certain parts of the UK, let's take Brighton for example, you can see people express themselves in any which way they feel fit. So you have the vintage looks, you have goths, you have people who dress in crazy eccentric colours. Like people are just free to be who they are, and it's the most magical thing, and it's very rare to see people who look like one another, which is actually a really beautiful thing, I think. However, in South Italy especially, it's different. I don't feel it's as diverse, although I will say Palermo does feel diverse. There are people here from different nationalities, but it's not the same to be said for all of South Italy. And as such, I do think people tend to look like clones of one another. You see the same fashion sense being repeated across everyone, the same boots that are worn, the same classic Pandora bracelet that every Italian woman seems to own. Everyone gets their nails done a certain way. There's less diversity. And I think if you dress a slightly different way to the norm, people stare at you a bit more than they would in the UK. So I think this is a big difference. However, make no mistake about it, we still have so-called chavs in the UK who will go to the supermarket in their pajamas, for example. So as diverse as we are, we do also have people that don't really give a monkeys about how they look. Whereas here in South Italy, people do, generally speaking, care about their appearance, and they do try to make an effort in terms of how they look. And this is especially noticeable on a Sunday when people will do their little Sunday passeggiata, walking along the seafront or in the city centre dressed up to the nines. So, you know, it is different here in South Italy sometimes. I do think appearance is something that people pay a lot more attention to. It's normal for an Italian woman to go to the hairdressers maybe even like once or twice a week to get a blow dry so that their hair always looks really fabulous. So yeah, there is definitely more of a sense of style here. I guess, you know, it's another aspect that Italy is known for. But I really do like the diversity that we have in the UK and how people can just be more free to be themselves. Customer service. Okay, in the UK, it's like this. Customer service is king, queen, and gentry. It is drilled into people who work in public facing roles, the importance of customer service. We have training programs, we have courses that are given to people to help them to deliver better customer service. It's a real thing. Whereas here in South Italy, customer service is a bit hit and miss, depending on where you go and on what you do. Government offices, I would say customer service is non-existent. People talk to you like you're a piece of dirt and they literally have no sense of customer satisfaction. When you go into shops, for example, again, this can depend. And it kind of fluctuates between two different extremes. On one hand, we have the shops where it's an inconvenience if you're waiting at the checkout to pay for something because the cashier is on their phone talking to someone. Whereas on the other hand, we have the overzealous approach where you'll go into a shop and people will literally be on top of your shoulders, watching everything that you do, following you everywhere you go in the store and just basically making you feel like you're a thief. So it does vary in these two aspects. Of course, in the middle, you do have some shops you go into and people are super friendly. They make you feel welcome. They say good morning to you when you go in or good afternoon. And you know, this is another thing that's different because in the UK, when you go into a shop, unless it's a particularly small shop and you have the ability to immediately interact with someone, you don't go into a shop and be like, buongiorno, good afternoon, good morning. It doesn't happen. You just go in, get your stuff, pay. You might have a little bit of a chit chat with the cashier, but that's it, done. But here in South Italy, people tend to say hello to everyone, even strangers on the street. And so it's more common in that sense to greet people at least, even if the rest of the experience lacks somewhat in terms of customer service. One thing I would say is very different compared to the UK and Italy is in terms of consumer law. So we have consumer laws in the UK that protect consumers when they purchase items and allow them to receive a refund or exchange where appropriate. And people know this and people know their rights under these consumer laws. And so they complain if the service is lacking and they don't receive what they should. Whereas here in South Italy, refund is a little bit of a swear word, okay? Because it doesn't really exist. You get a refund if you are incredibly lucky, because in the majority of cases, you will get an exchange or a credit note. You will never ever receive that cash back again that you paid for something. And so this makes your shopping experience more intentional because you know if you make a mistake and you buy something that you shouldn't have bought, it's not going to be easy for you to rectify that error. So this is this is difficult, I think, sometimes because not everything you buy is to a high standard or functions properly, and it can be difficult sometimes to navigate that here in South Italy. But having said that, there are some places where the service is lovely, and I have to be honest, those are the places I tend to return back to. I'm very cautious about trying new places sometimes because I know how hit and miss the customer service is here as an experience. So I tend to really advocate and support those businesses that give me the best service. Let's talk about healthcare. Now, this is an aspect I'm often asked about, but I have to be honest with you, I don't really have, touch wood, trying to find some wood, I'll touch my head instead, a lot of experience of the Italian healthcare system because fortunately I've not had to use it very often. One thing I will say though is that it is deemed to be one of the best healthcare systems in the world, and the few times that I have had contact with the healthcare system here have always been positive. I will say I had to visit a doctor's surgery once that resembled something, I don't even know what, out of like an eccentric inventor's room. It was just full of junk. And in my mind, coming from the UK where doctor surgeries are quite clinical, they're very clean and organised and neat, that was a really surreal experience. But other than that, my interaction with the healthcare service here has always been positive. Now, it can be complicated in Italy, for expats especially, to obtain healthcare. It all depends on your financial and work situation, and the fees now can be quite expensive to pay for healthcare for the year if you don't work here, for example, with a contract. So that's another consideration that I would say. But in the UK, we have the NHS, the National Health Service. Beautiful concept. They do such an amazing job. However, they're not perfect. There are problems, long wait times, doctors and nurses regularly going on strike for pay and working conditions. And yeah, it's not a perfect system. It essentially just cannot cope with the demand. We have a lot of people that move to the UK to try to benefit from the healthcare service that is predominantly free for everyone, but it puts a lot of pressure on a system that needs more investment. So I would say it's a great concept on a surface level, but there are many layers to it that need attention and investment in order to make it a more efficient service overall. Whereas here in Italy, there can be long wait times, and people do often tend to go private if they need to get something done quickly, or they don't want to have to endure a long time to wait. Essentially, the healthcare system is good here, and I think it can be complicated always. It always relates to bureaucracy, trying to go to your local healthcare office, ASL, and deal with things. But once you've navigated that, it is a really good service here. One thing that's a little bit different though is how doctor surgeries are positioned. So here in South Italy, you'll find a lot of doctor surgeries in the same apartment buildings where people live. Whereas in the UK, predominantly doctor surgeries are standalone buildings, not normally in the same complex or the actual same building where somebody lives, give or take. I mean, I think it's just due to the way that the houses and buildings are here in the south of Italy. So I think it's just because of the structure here. But in the UK, generally speaking, I think there will be a few exceptions. They are standalone buildings that you visit when you need to go to the doctors. So let's talk about food shopping. So in the UK, we have a lot of superstores, places like Tesco's and Sainsbury's, giant superstores where you can find absolutely everything from electrical items through to fresh fish, through to alcohol, through to food, through to clothes. Anything you can think of is all under one roof, which means shopping is a much more convenient experience. A lot of these superstores are open until late at night, some even 24 hours a day. And so it does make for an easy shopping experience. You don't have to go to all of the individual shops to get the things that you need. There is also more of an emphasis on online shopping and home delivery, which makes it even more convenient for the busy lives that we all tend to live back in the UK. So this is in contrast though to South Italy. Now in South Italy, one thing to note is that the supermarkets, although they have the same name, they are operated almost as like a franchise model in the same way that McDonald's and KFC work, for example. So you have all the branding and the logo, but it's independently run. It's not managed centrally like the majority of the supermarkets are in the UK. So it is different sometimes to visit different versions of the same shop, because your experience will vary from one to the other, even though the shop name is the same. Also, when it comes to supermarket shopping here, there is less of an emphasis for online shopping. People tend to go in presence. A lot of supermarkets here will offer home delivery, but usually for items that you have purchased in store. I think home shopping is something that people are still getting their heads around here in South Italy. I'm not saying it doesn't exist at all, but it's certainly not at the same level as it is back in the UK. People prefer to go in person to buy their groceries rather than choosing them online through a computer screen. The majority of supermarkets here operate to a traditional timetable. They will be closed on Sundays, although some do stay open, but just for half a day until 1 o'clock. And then you also have like evening closing, like usually around 9 o'clock. It depends on the supermarket. However, there are some that do open 24 hours a day, but they are not in the same quantity as they are back in the UK. The majority of the smaller supermarkets here will operate to the more traditional hours that I've just mentioned. And I would say overall, although in the bigger supermarkets you will find meat counters, fish counters, fruit and vegetables, there is more of a traditional emphasis on shopping at the individual shops themselves, i.e. the fishmongers, the butchers, the bakery, rather than going to the supermarket to buy everything. And I feel like this is actually something that I really do like, because the fish you buy from the fishmongers, it just feels fresher than the fish you could buy at the supermarket, for example. And the same goes for the fruit and vegetables and the meat. And so there is more of an emphasis here to go to these individual places themselves, as opposed to buying everything all at one time. So yeah, these are my reflections on how my life is so different now compared to when I lived back in the UK and how I now live in the south of Italy, on all of the different aspects that I have mentioned. If there is something you would like me to do a video on in the future, please comment below and let me know. I'm all ears. I'm ready to hear your ideas, because this year I want to produce the content that you want to watch and see more of. I will see you in the next video.